Hey, welcome to Page Break. I'm your host, Brian McClellan, coming to you on a very windy morning here in the mountains of Utah. Quick reminder that Montego, my Glass Immortals novella, is officially out on May 23rd. You can pick up signed copies from my website, ebooks from your favorite retailer, and audiobooks from Audible and iTunes. For European readers, you can also get signed copies of all my novellas from The Broken Binding. Also for European readers, don't forget that I'll be in PeerCon in Poznan, Poland, the weekend of June 16th. Now, on with the show. My guest this week is author Beth Cato. Beth is known for her Clockwork Dagger series and Blood of Earth Trilogy, and is a widely published science fiction and fantasy poet and short story writer. Beth also runs a wonderful recipe blog called Bready or Not. She has a new swashbuckling fantasy novel out on June 1st called 1,000 Recipes for Revenge. Beth and I chat about her upcoming book, and we talk about food. Seriously, we spend a good 45 minutes talking about food, so if you're not prepared for this sudden culinary episode, then you can get right out of here because Beth and I love food. Beth is a cheese tourist, which is my new favorite thing. Enjoy my yummy conversation with Beth Cato. Beth, it is so good to see you.
It's great to see you. It's been way too long since we've seen each other.
Oh my gosh, probably at least 4 years, I want to say.
Yeah, it was 2017, probably 2018, maybe. I don't know.
Oh my gosh, that long, huh? Yeah, so probably the last, Phoenix Comic-Con even?
Probably, yeah.
Not sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hope you're doing well.
I am. It feels like life is throwing a lot at me right now, but I'm hanging in there and getting stuff done. And hey, I've got a book coming out, so that's always a good thing.
That's always a good thing. Very exciting. So this is your new one. And I'm gonna warn the listener real quick that we might talk about food quite a lot.
That's true. Very relevant.
Because we are both food lovers. In fact, I think maybe the first time I ever met you was over a gigantic thing of fudge, I want to say, that you brought to a convention.
Probably. Yeah, I'm known for bringing tubs of cookies and fudge and bars, brownies, blondies, just whatever, because I like feeding people at cons, and I can be very much a wallflower. And if I have cookies, I can at least say, hey, you want a cookie?
See,
it works out.
I think that's a fantastic way to get to know people.
It really is. And even if they're like, oh, no, I'm do gluten-free, whatever, it's still, we can still talk about food and cookies, and it's all good.
Yeah. No, that's wonderful. So your new book is, it's food-based. So it's 1,000 Recipes for Revenge.
Yes.
And so it sounds like you have a food-based magic system?
I do, yeah. And I've had people already asking me about if there are 1,000 recipes in the book. And no, there are not literally 1,000 recipes, but there are a number of recipes, including epigraphs that include magical spins on authentic French period recipes from the 16th and 17th century. So yeah, it's an entirely food-based magic system where epicuria is a magical ingredient that can be flora or fauna, harvested throughout the world. And when processed by a chef, and that's chef with a capital C, they can pull on the blessing of the gods and endow magic.
That is fantastic. I really love that. People who have read my Powder Mage books know that one of the kind of central side characters is a god who uses his magic through food. And so I totally I gel with it. It's like a fun thing to play with, especially considering kind of the tendency of epic fantasy to have feast scenes, and
yes,
people will, have conversations over meals and stuff like that. So it works really well.
It does. And there's so many ways you can take it and make it fresh and new and twist it around. And in my book, I don't even go into so many of the feast scenes. It's really about kind of the intimacy and the connections through food, whether that's magical or mundane, and the importance of it, and kind of using the emotional and magical together in a way.
Oh yeah, for sure. I think we actually mentioned this on a recent episode, but one of the very few kind of celebrity deaths that hit me hard as an adult was Anthony Bourdain.
Oh yeah.
Because of that was his approach to kind of to making TV, obviously, because that's what he did for a living, but to cooking and to talking to humans that he had never met before. And I really loved that. I love that kind of like the intimacy and the kind of emotional connection with other people that he really strove for. So I love that.
Yeah, he really had that connection with a lot of people, and just food is so important because it's not just sustenance, it's culture, it's memory, it's family. It's, it's whatever your faith is. I mean, for me, it's Christmas. I think of traditional Christmas recipes, how much that means to me and that connection. And then it's fun writing it because you get to play with those memories and gives you an excuse to try new stuff too.
Yeah.
So, especially for me, I love cheese, and it's like, oh, good. Now I have an excuse to buy more French cheese. Okay. Let's go for it.
Yeah. You're like a cheese hunter, aren't you?
I am. I look at it like Pokemon, got to try them all if I can.
Yeah.
Because as long as it's not a hot, spicy cheese or truffle cheeses, I don't like those. But otherwise, I try and give pretty much everything at least a try. And I have a document I call the cheese log, where I've tracked everything I've tried since 2015.
Yeah.
And it's now 180,000 words.
Oh my goodness. Do you know how many cheeses that you've tried?
I do not, because of how I initially started formatting it. I need, when I have time, to go back through and actually number them. A lot of that word count is like the maker's descriptions of cheeses, or maybe suggested accompaniments. So it's probably 2/3 of their descriptions and maybe 1/3 of my data and my reaction. But it's now a document that wants to give my Dropbox a little heart attack every time I open it, especially if I'm on my phone checking when I'm standing at the cheese counter,
Right. Have I tried this before?
Yep. Now, it's nice because I just bring up the document and I do a quick search and verify, oh, yep, I need it or I don't need it, or, oh yeah, I tried this in 2017. Okay. I can give it a pass and try something else new.
I try to be more adventurous with cheese these days. But I still I definitely have that Midwestern childhood picky eater, I eat cheddar and mozzarella kind of thing going on. But I definitely try to I've been trying to branch out more, but it's a struggle sometimes.
Well, the cool thing is, even with cheddar, even if someone just likes cheddar, once you get into cheese and really see what's out there, my goodness, you have, hundreds of kinds of cheddar that you can try. It's amazing. And, and then depending on where you are in the US or, abroad, you'll have a lot more available than what, say, I might have living near Phoenix. It's much more limited here, but it's better now than it used to be, for sure.
When I was a kid, my mom used to take me out maybe once every 2 months or so. So I lived outside of Cleveland, and we would drive out about 45 minutes, kind of near the border with Pennsylvania, to this cheese factory. That was an Amish cheese factory.
Oh, that sounds good.
And so the cheeses were not adventurous, but they were incredibly high quality.
Yeah.
And that's what we would always eat, we would have, she would have a packet of American cheese for, I don't even remember what, for picnics or whatever. Mm-hmm. But then all the rest of the cheese in the fridge was this really good Amish cheese. And we'd get the squeaky cheese and the meat sticks that they made and all that stuff. That's a really important childhood memory for me.
Well, there you go. And that just draws back into what we were talking about earlier. Yeah. Yeah. And see, for me, it's whenever I travel, I'm all about cheese tourism. I'm dead serious. Cheese tourism, it is a thing you can actually go on. There are places like Cheese Journeys online where you can do trips to Switzerland or England and do cheese focused tours, often with cheese professionals. But for me, it's much cheaper, much, just me Googling and researching to bits. And in 2019, we went to England and Scotland for the very first time. Don't know when I'll get back, but I want to. And I arranged the whole trip around being able to take a day trip from York into Wensleydale to the Wensleydale Creamery, so that we could visit there and I could have Wensleydale cheese, eat at the Wensleydale Creamery's restaurant, be there in the Dales. And so that was the foundation of the whole trip.
Every time I see Wensleydale at the little cheese counter in my grocery store, I always have the Wallace and Gromit voice in my head.
So many people do, yeah. It's either that or they think of Monty Python and the cheese shop skit.
Right, yeah.
Mr. Wensleydale, and yeah.
Yeah. No, I love that. When I went to Paris last summer, I was hanging out with my my publisher. And there was a moment at which he was trying to get me to try some incredibly stinky cheese. Well, at the moment I had COVID and didn't know it yet. This was right before my first COVID experience. And so I was very much like, I still have jet lag. I'm going to beg off of this.
Yeah.
And he goes, and he asked me what kind of cheese I liked at home. And I was like, oh, like I like cheddar and mozzarella and provolone.
Oh, I can imagine.
And very straight faced, he just nodded sagely and went, children's cheeses.
Oh, that's a burn.
But it was just so funny the way he was very nice about it. Yeah. But it was just, a bit condescending, but a bit playful at the same time.
Yes.
But it is fun because food does connect people, like you were saying before, like, people have childhood memories associated with food. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's good food and sometimes it's bad food. Yeah. Like the garbage that their parents had them eat because they were busy, or they just couldn't afford to get better food, like they're trying to make do. And, people think back on those foods and it's always like, sometimes it's dread and sometimes it's comfort, like my dad to this day, he will not eat spaghetti, which is the weirdest thing in the world because I love pasta, but his mom made him eat kind of crappy spaghetti in the 50s. Oh. And he just to this day, no, I don't want anything to do with that.
Yeah. My husband's that way about eggs. He was forced to eat eggs for breakfast as a kid. He cannot. He doesn't want to have anything to do with them now. He'll have them if they're mixed in cookies. He can tolerate them, as a binding ingredient because you don't taste the egg or see the egg texture. But yeah, it's the same kind of thing. He has an aversion to it since then.
Yeah, it definitely affects your kind of memory and your the way that you look at the world and stuff too.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's funny because you can get people that, like how people are raised, are they raised on TV dinners? If it's just something you scarf down, are you raised with family dinner? Like, because family dinner was a big thing for me growing up.
Yeah.
Almost every night, everybody gathered around the table at that time and you ate. And that's just how it is. And, like, I guess I don't have kids, but my wife and I, sometimes we'll do a kind of a formal quote unquote dinner, but, a lot of times we just eat whatever we're doing, let's reheat whatever and we'll eat at the counter and then go about our evenings kind of thing.
Yeah. And it's that way in my household a lot too, because my husband with his work shifts, it's, we tend to fend for ourselves and maybe once a week we'll do a meal that we make sure that we do together. And that makes it makes it extra special because we don't take it for granted. We can kind of plan for it and, do steak once a month, something like that. And it does make it special.
Yeah. So where did you kind of find your love of baking and cooking?
Really good. I always had a very keen interest in food and trying food I remember being like 4 or 5 years old. And I told my mom whenever she was cooking, I was her official taster. Whatever she was making, I would have the first bite and I would tell her, oh, it needs more pepper, more salt, things like that. My grandpa loved cooking passionately. And he loved trying new recipes and, trying to make his own sauerkraut at home or he served in China during World War II and he loved, and he was in India too. And he loved trying to recreate some of those recipes, which was very hard in Central California, going through like the 80s when I knew him and, was trying to cook with him. But he always had this passion for food and he would send me and my grandma off to the grocery store on these wild goose chases asking after these spices. And the people would look at us like, what are you talking about? I've never even heard of that spice. And so it was really kind of in my family and probably genetic. It's just, this interest in food. And just, I always had a keen interest in trying things. Didn't mean I have to like it or have it again, but I just like trying it. It's like, even these days, my husband enjoys beer and I don't like beer, but I'll have a sip of what he's having just because it's like I file it in my head. Like, okay, this is a stout. Yeah. The texture, the foaming. Okay. And I enjoy that kind of sensory experience around food. And I realized when I was diagnosed with autism about 1.5 years ago in my 40s, she brought it up. I'd never thought of it that way before, but so many people with autism, it's a sensory experience. And, an oversensory reaction is pretty common. Like my son diagnosed as a kid, trouble with crowds and noises, things like that. For me, my sensory skill in a positive way was food and experiencing the world through food. So once I was told that in my diagnosis, a lot of things suddenly made sense. Like, oh, okay, so this is why I'm a foodie. This is why I just enjoy the experience of tasting things and traveling places, trying things. It's all part of that. It's just part of how my brain works.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. I had a almost kind of the opposite when I was a kid. That I was always very afraid of trying new things. Like I had kind of like a stable of what I knew I liked, and anything outside of that freaked me out. Like to the point where I would get in fights with my parents, at the dinner table, sometimes out. I was genuinely terrified of putting something in my mouth that I didn't like, like it just, the idea, I don't even know if I even had the kind of consciousness to even phrase it that well.
Yeah.
Something about food that I didn't know, like was scary to me, which is really strange because I have it's been probably about the last 4 years or so that I have genuinely been trying to like not be a picky eater anymore. And I'm finding that I like way more than I ever thought I did. Like that fear is no longer there. Like it kind of lurks under the surface and I'll still like when I was in Paris with the cheese, like I'll still kind of demure at times.
Yeah.
But I have found like, man, I eat so much Mexican food these days. It's like 4 out of 7 dinners a week is something Mexican food. And 5 years ago, I would not have even touched Chipotle, which is obviously fake Mexican, but like I wouldn't have even gone that far.
Yeah.
But like, and the same with curries and things like that. I've like really discovered, I actually like Thai food. I like all these different things that as a kid, even as a young adult, something about trying something new always freaked me out. And I don't know why. I'm not entirely sure.
Brains are weird like that. I've learned a lot through helping my son because he's autistic and he was diagnosed very early. And for, a long time now, he has been in feeding therapy every week. And I've learned so much through being there in his sessions and helping him. And for him, it was a case where his brain literally didn't process things as food. And it's like, or is worse, something more like feces, it's literally like something that is completely repulsive. And then you think, once you realize that that's how his brain and body are processing it, it makes a whole lot more sense. It's like, oh yeah, if you're trying to get me to eat something and I see it as a pile of poo on a plate, yeah, I'm not going to want to eat that. And so many foods were that way to him.
Yeah. Just inedible, basically.
Inedible and repulsive. I mean, I remember when he was like 2, he touched a glazed donut and threw up just touching it.
Oh my goodness.
That's how sensitive he was. Yeah.
Oh, that's crazy.
Yeah. So his diet was very limited for a long time and he didn't eat very much. And he's realized now he's enjoying trying things. He's never going to be an eat everything kind of guy. He's now 18, but he now enjoys the experience of food and he can try things and he doesn't have that reaction, but it's taken many years of therapy and guidance to get him to that point. But now he really enjoys food a whole lot more.
Is that difficult as a parent who is a foodie, who loves food? Like it just, I got to imagine, because like anybody trying to connect with another person over something they love and that being rejected is always difficult. And it's even harder for a parent relationship.
Absolutely. It was very hard on me, especially when he was very young, because I was so desperate to try things. And there was so much bad advice out there. I mean, there are the people out there who say, well, just don't, he'll eat when he's hungry. Just starve him. And I'm like, no, that's child abuse. I'm not going to do that. And the thing is, no matter how hungry he was, it wasn't going to work anyway, because he literally could not see it as food. And things like that make me so upset when I think of them now, because I had so much advice along those lines and it makes me angry. But yeah, it was something we had to work through. And I had to be resilient and keep trying and stop trying to take it as personally. Because that's the thing. I love to bake. I love feeding people. I love seeing people enjoy what I make them. And for him, it was like, okay, I'll find the few things that you like and we'll lean on that. I learned that he enjoyed the homemade bread that I would do. So it's like, okay, so every week from the time he was in kindergarten, I've made sandwich bread for him. And that was a way that I could still do something and feel like I was feeding him and taking care of him. And yeah, I can't do elaborate meals and things like that for him, but we found things that worked. And that's accommodations, that's modifications, and that's really learning to speak with him at his level and not trying to force him to be something or do something that he can't do.
Yeah, and that's tough. Like that's tough trying to work through kind of the personal psychology of that, I would say.
Yeah, it really was, but it was worth the effort. And I learned he liked brownies. So for his birthday, for a whole lot of years, he had brownies for his birthday. This past birthday, when he turned 18, was the first one where he got to have a legit slice of cake for his birthday. Went out and bought it.
Hey, Page Break listeners. Brian here, rudely interrupting myself for a bit of a plug. Making a podcast isn't free, and I'm hoping that you enjoy it enough to pitch in a pittance. To do so, head on over to patreon.com/pagebreak, where you can toss as little as $3 a month into the tip jar, $5 a month to get the podcast ad-free and early, and $10 a month to hear your name in the credits and feel a smug sense of superiority. You can also buy my books from your favorite retailer, or direct from my website. Thanks to everyone who contributes. Now back to me. I was thinking about what you were saying in terms of kind of when you were younger and trying to find kind of exotic spices, things that are different that you're not going to find in normal stores.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about that in terms of like, I kind of wonder what it was like to really try to cook in kind of a time before like in my brain, my adulthood, the world has been fairly global and you can get things, even if you can't find it at the store nearby, you can order it.
Absolutely.
You couldn't do that even probably 20 years ago?
No, definitely not. And that's one of the fun things about reading period cookbooks is, when you come back to the realization of, using the whole animal for cooking and nothing going to waste, and that even including, the hooves, you boil them down, use that for your gelatin, things like that. And every part of the body, you would know something that could be used, even things growing in the garden. You would use the roots, the stalks, the flowers, everything. Nothing would go to waste.
Yeah. It's a lot. Also, a lot different experience when you're when it's like food that you're making from not just like the store, but like from your farm or even your tiny homestead. It doesn't even like it used to be that even people with little tiny plots of land would always have a garden and would always have some herbs, stuff that you'd throw into the pot. And that's an experience. I guess I experienced it in a very small way when I was a kid because we always had a massive garden that I hated because I had to weed it. And my mom did a lot of fresh fruit and fresh vegetables, and we would can and freeze a lot of stuff ourselves.
Okay.
But that is a totally different experience when you're kind of, especially when it comes to meat and, butchering and all that kind of stuff.
Yes. Yeah, there's a different intimacy and appreciation for what goes into it. And flavor-wise, you can tell a difference big time over, if something from a farm that's local that is using maybe a heritage chicken versus, a Foster Farms chicken from the grocery store. Wow, is there a difference in the meat and the quality of it? It's like, you don't have the huge chicken breast like you would on the genetically modified version from the grocery store, but the flavor is so much deeper and the texture is different too.
Yeah, and it's funny because I never appreciated that when I was young and when we did have a big garden. And I talk to my wife sometimes about this because she grew up on canned everything from the store. And
I did a lot too.
Honestly, canned vegetables revolt me. And it's weird because, I never have been a vegetable person. I've never I'm a very round boy. I love my sweets. I love my meats and things like that. But I didn't even realize until I was fed some like canned vegetables and things like that I had grown up really quite good with like homegrown stuff. And my wife never had that experience. And so she'll say, "Oh, I don't want fruit." And I'll be like, "But this is an amazing mango or an amazing strawberry, and I'll get her to try it and be like, "Oh, wow, that's really good. That's like candy." And I'll be like, "That's what fruit's supposed to taste like." And she's like, "Oh, not the weird sugary stuff that I grew up with."
Yeah, I grew up with a lot of the canned stuff too, because I grew up fairly poor and we did have a small garden and grew some things off and on. but it was a lot of canned food, a lot of frozen dinners, your pasta from the store. My mom used to do a Spam rice that I didn't even like as a kid. We made do because we didn't have much money and, had to make food, had a lot of cereal for breakfast, stuff like that.
Yeah.
And very little in the way of fresh vegetables. And I've tried to expand my horizons as an adult. And, I now air fry a lot of vegetables, and that makes things so tasty.
I grilled some asparagus last night, and honestly, like I was saying, 5 years ago, I would not have even eaten asparagus. Like, it would not have even gotten on the plate. And I just salt, pepper, olive oil, a little bit of lemon sprinkled on top, threw it on the grill, and honestly, it was delicious.
Yeah.
Like, I had that with a chicken breast, and it was so dang good.
That sounds really good. But, I think we have more diverse ways to prepare food now. I mean, I remember I've seen online articles too about Brussels sprouts and how pretty much it's a generational thing. Like, I know the time I had them as a kid, they were boiled and they were nasty. I thought they were horrible, but you roast them or you air fry them. And apparently it's also a different variety that's available in stores now than was available 30 years ago. But they're really good if you know how to cook them just right.
Oh, yeah. No, like a maple bacon Brussels sprout is one of the best things you will ever eat.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a recipe for that on my Bready or Not blog too. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Let's talk about Bready or Not a little bit. I love it. It's so funny because I was getting ready for us to chat, and so I was looking at your website and immediately printed off the first recipe on there.
Okay.
And what was it here? Oh, what was that? That was the chicken and rice soup that you posted. That.
Oh yeah. Yep.
Sounds incredible.
Yeah, that's a good one, and that's a recipe that I've been tweaking for 10 years now to get it just right for our tastes. But yeah, I have a food blog called Bready or Not. I'm all about the puns. And I started it back on my live journal, 2012 thereabouts. And then when I grabbed my domain name of bethcato.com in 2014, I moved it over there. And every single week, every Wednesday morning, I have a brand new recipe. And a lot of them do tend toward the sweet, a lot of cookies, a lot of bars, bundt cakes, things like that. But there's some crock pot recipes in there too. And things like, bacon crack, which is like chocolate covered bacon that's candied, and, just all kinds of sweets and all kinds of fun stuff. And then, stuff like Brussels sprouts in there just to throw people off.
I absolutely love baking and cooking, but I have made myself stop baking, especially because I just eat all of it. Like, if I make a treat, if I make something tasty, like I said before, it's just me and my wife. Like, there's not a lot of competition in the house. I will devour whatever it is that I made over the course of the next, 48 hours.
And that is why I am all about distributing the calorie load, because I used to have that same issue many years. And my husband's coworkers now take the brunt of it. So pretty much probably 95% of the stuff I bake goes to his work, and they know my containers. They know what they look like. It's a red-lidded Gladware, and they know those are the Cato goodies. That's what they're called. And so they get the majority of the stuff. And then because it is typically just me and my husband who eat the goodies here at home, I've learned the value of freezing things to portion things out. That a lot of bundt cakes, even brownies, cookies, lots of varieties of apple cake, slice them up when they're fresh, freeze it, and then you can portion it out. And I think that attitude has helped us a lot.
That is good. I wouldn't mind getting back into baking if I kind of had a little bit better. Like, I rarely leave the house. Like, I don't have coworkers or,
That's me. Yeah.
I can't. I don't have anybody to distribute it to. In fact, the other day, I smoked a pork shoulder.
Oh, nice.
And it's so good. But like, after 3 days of eating pork, you kind of get to the point where you're like, if I eat more of this, I will die.
Yeah.
And so, of course, I divvy it up. I freeze a ton of it. I like doing these little 2-ounce things of frozen smoked meat, because then that's perfect for nachos.
Oh, great. Yeah.
And I love doing that. But I also had so much that I ended up at a game night with friend of the show, Dan Wells. And I ended up taking like 3 pounds of pork to his house.
Wow. How much was the original cut?
Gosh, it was huge. I mean, huge. I don't actually, it must have been maybe 16, 18 pounds or something like that.
Oh,
And,
wow. That is a
it'll
lot.
cook down a lot.
Yeah, sure. But that's still a lot of meat.
It was a lot of meat. But man, no, I have that problem all the time is that I like to cook. I love to cook big, like I'm kind of in my element when I'm like hosting Thanksgiving. But that comes from my childhood, growing up as the youngest of 6, and I would help my mom with making cookies and stuff like that. Yeah, it is kind of like I struggle with portion control.
And I think a lot of people do. I know I have, yeah.
No, and it's tough, like food is just like, it's one of those pleasures that there's not a lot of shame and judgment around it. Obviously, there's lots of body kind of issues with eating and stuff like that, and it can cause a lot of problems. But it doesn't have a taboo around it generally. There's every time I say something like this, it's immediately in my brain something sparks up. But yeah, you know what I mean. It's an easy thing to really like and to overindulge in.
Yes.
I definitely struggle with that.
Well, I know years ago I enjoyed it when you brought honey.
Oh man, yeah. I got in my head at one point that I was going to start taking, like you did with doing fudge and stuff, is that I was going to start taking honey with me, and I think I did it like one convention where I brought a bunch of little bottles, like
the little bears.
Yeah, little tiny bears, and I handed them out to a bunch of my friends. I don't know why I stopped doing that. I think my beehives have struggled since I moved, which was about 7 years ago.
Wow, it's been that long. Jeez.
Yeah. I moved, and I tried twice to get my hives up and going here in Utah. And I think I had one good harvest, and then I had like 2 really struggling summers, and now all of my stuff's empty. I haven't done it for a few years now.
That's sad.
But it was fun, like we were talking about, in terms of richness of flavor and stuff like that. Homegrown honey, no joke. You can taste that difference in it.
Oh yeah.
It's got like a depth of flavor to it that you don't get from the stuff you buy at the store.
Well, it's that terroir, that goes back to, bringing in the inherent flavors of the place where the food originates. It's legit. I've seen some people online try and laugh it off like, oh no, cheese is cheese or butter is butter. It's like, no. If you're saying that you haven't really tried, tried it from different places or tried it when it's fresh. Terroir is very much a very real thing. Well,
there's it's this, that is actually a really fascinating concept because you're going to get like a location can have an effect like that seeps in on a really subtle level.
Absolutely.
Especially, like growing food and stuff. You can see this with problems where, like a factory leaches chemicals into the ground near a farm and then the food is spoiled.
Yeah.
Or the food just tastes weird or makes people sick. But you can have that on a very subtle kind of like local level of just the food tastes a certain way because of what's in the environment.
Yeah, my book goes into that too with, my character Ada being an empathetic chef. She being just near food, she can know where it's from, and if she's been there and experienced it, she knows the point of origin and why it tastes as it does because of the stream it's nearby. Or, that butter, you can taste a bit of the sea to it because it's, it originated near the ocean. Things like that. And she's able to pick up on that kind of thing because she's, part of her tour and her training days, she was taught to notice that kind of inherent detail within food.
Yeah. No, that's fascinating. I really like that. It's kind of a cool, like, it's always fun when you play with characters who have a particular attention to detail.
Yes.
That the average person does not. And especially if you can go as unique as food and location. That's quite cool.
Well, I'm playing in a setting that's a secondary world based on Musketeer era France. There's just so much material to use. And it's like, I had to be careful to try not to bring in a lot of the colonial elements because they're not in my world, but there's still so much that's inherently there. And a lot of things that, like going back to what we're talking about, using the whole animal, things we don't think about these days, or ingredients that in America we really don't encounter, like cardoons or coxcombs, things like that they used back then.
I don't know what either of those things are.
Cardoon is a vegetable, and coxcombs, literally the comb on the rooster's head.
Really? I didn't even know that. It wouldn't even have occurred to me that could be used in cooking.
Yeah, and I first realized that a few years ago. There was this show imported from Ireland called Lords and Ladles that was on Netflix for a while. And it was a cooking competition where they had these 3 premier Irish chefs, and they would take them to these different Irish estates, and they would divvy up the tasks, and someone would have to forage and someone would do this, but they always had to cook a recipe that was originally used from like the 16th through 18th century at the estate. And they had to recreate this massive feast. I'm going back to the feast thing. And it was really interesting because they did have to use a lot of obscure ingredients, even to them as very practiced chefs within Ireland. And it was a fascinating show. And they had to use coxcombs one time. So I was able to work that in my sequel book as a epigraph, because I have these little food-focused epigraphs throughout the little leaders into each chapter. So yeah, there's one about coxcombs because it's a good period ingredient.
It's a fascinating thing to think about because, like much like it's hard for us to think back on the days when it's hard to get more diverse ingredients, not even that long ago. If you go back before refrigeration, you suddenly have an entirely different way of eating and storing food and trying to use it properly, and rotating your pantry and these things that we don't think about in any way, especially kind of where we live. And kind of we have the benefit of like famine has not existed in my lifetime in my personal experience.
Yeah.
Like if you live in the US, even if you're incredibly poor, it's not that hard to get food.
Might not be the healthiest food, but you can get food. Yeah.
Right. It might not be great for you, but you can get food. And like back before refrigeration, you go and you have to kind of get crazy with the things you put into your food because it has to be either previously stored in some way, in a way that would probably be sometimes a little unsettling to us, like actual like salted pork and things like that. From what I understand, wasn't fantastic. It was a little unpleasant.
Well, salted everything. I mean, that's how you preserve butter too, is you have salt water and butter, and it'll preserve it for months and months.
Yeah. But just that thought of those, kind of the way things were done is so incredibly foreign to us. Yeah. I think it's really fun that you are putting a lot of that into the new book. That's a cool way of I don't even know how to phrase this. Maybe reminding us of how things kind of used to be. Because I don't know, I've teased this a lot in my brain the last year or two, especially this idea that the way that we live our lives now, especially with access to the internet, access to all of human knowledge at all times, just it changes the way that we do everything. And, compared to people even 100 years ago. Yeah. It's just absolutely wild.
It is. And it's sad when you think, even though we have so much knowledge available, so much knowledge has been lost too, when it comes to things like food preservation. And I love reading food history books. I geek out over that. I mean, that's one of the best things about researching for these books is, oh, good, I have an excuse to buy all of these books because it's just so much fun. Even just for cheese alone, I have a lot of books on cheese. And there's the way technology has evolved around preserving cheese, because, I mean, you're looking at for centuries there, it was a major protein to get you through winter. You had to preserve your cheese and make it last, or you had to be able to get your cheese wheels, your 80, 100-pound cheese wheels off of the Swiss Alps and import them to England, things like that. And it's wild when you learn about things like that, like how much of the early American slave trade was about rum going to New England and New England cheeses going back to the Caribbean. And they had to preserve it to make that journey. And it's horrible when you think of how it's involved in all of these things, but throughout history, throughout all these different countries, cheese had to get around and they had to be able to make it last to do it. And that's why like rubbing cheese wheels with lard and fat and, the cloth wrapped cheddars like we see now that England is famous for. The technique actually arose out of New England in the early colonial era, because it was warmer there than it was in England. And then the technology actually went back to England. And now it's still one of the major things out of the area that is the cheddar area, the actual geographic zone. And yeah, cloth wrapped cheddars. I mean, that's something absolutely exquisite, but it has this weird history going back to early America and even the slave trade. And I've never thought that.
Right. Well, and when things were invented often blows people's minds.
Yeah.
Like I guess if you had kind of put it to me and said, when was cloth wrapped cheddar invented? I probably would have ballparked, early Middle Ages.
Yeah.
Like just as a guess.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have had an idea because you think about cheese has been around for, I don't know, like since the dawn of human civilization. It's been around for a long time.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that when you have a technological kind of change or leap, when those things happen.
It's weird because, I mean, you think of like a waxed wrapped Gouda, like a lot of people are familiar with that, Christmas time, even if that's the only time they have it. I mean, that goes back, I think it was the 16th century. And that's how they realized they could coat it in wax and that would keep out the bugs. And there was even pirates, would be getting these boats and stealing their cheese because it was a commodity. And going through France in the medieval time, a lot of times, if you had a monastery, they would get payment from people in the form of cheese. I mean, it's just integrated into everything.
Oh, yeah. Well, and just how you feed people is like the logistics of literally everything. Like again, as modern people, we don't really think about it, especially modern Americans, because food is always at the grocery store.
Yes.
Like it is just not really in our experience, with some exceptions, that there isn't food to be gotten somehow.
Yes.
And so this idea of like voyages, packing for a voyage, literally packing a full wooden ship for a voyage.
Yeah.
Much of the logistics of that is the water and food for the crew, for the passengers. There's so many things, an army marches on its stomach, right? Foraging, your supply lines. There's all these things that, and it all comes back to food. It's all about, keeping the machinery, literally what somebody digests, the human machinery. You have to have fuel for that.
Yeah. And you brought up a great point there when you talk about, the army marching on its stomach, because that is so true. And talk about some interesting lost technology when you get some unique history books and that shows them digging the trenches, and they're literally using like horse troughs to mix dough for bread and things like that. Because you're having to feed hundreds of people. How are you going to do that? You use what you got. And yeah, the foraging, everything like that. It's fascinating.
I don't know why this popped into my head, but a few days ago I was thinking about it's part of a series of kind of like early America kind of cultural myths.
Okay.
Paul Bunyan. This popped into my head the other day because I got into a tall tales thing when I was when I was a little kid, huge into kind of the American tall tales. And the whole thing with Paul Bunyan was that these guys would like make pancakes like on, house-sized frying pans.
I remember that, yeah.
They would skate with butter on the bottoms of their skates to try to grease up the pan. And then they'd make these massive pancakes that would feed either one for Paul or, one for 50 lumberjacks.
Yeah.
And I don't know, it's so funny that little piece of weird Americana, has stuck with me as an adult, 30 years after I read about it as a little kid.
But it's cool. I can when you're saying that, I can picture like a book that I read years ago and seeing an illustration of that. That was full color, probably done like the 1950s, that kind of, wash color. And I can see that in my head. And
honestly, I'm probably picturing the exact same thing right now.
Yeah.
Because I grabbed everything I could get on that stuff.
I've read a lot of that stuff too, yeah.
Yeah. But it's the way that food becomes part of, kind of a cultural myth, which I think is kind of sweet, kind of lovely.
But then it's like you go to an area where, a lot of those myths originated, and you'll see, the dishes named after them, and, you'll see the regional mythical merger of that kind of thing too.
Yeah. Yeah. There's one that's a little bit more modern that is beef Wellington. I have never had beef Wellington. And for some reason, it has like kind of popped up on my radar several times in the last year. And now there's something in my brain that's like, next time I see it prepared somewhere, I am getting beef Wellington.
I have never had that either. And I've looked at making it at home, and I haven't done it yet, but it does look really good to me.
Well, and it's a bit of a process too.
It's very much a process, yes. And you need a good cut of meat that'll be nice and tender in the middle too.
Yeah, because it's normally done with filet, right?
Yeah, filet, and then you do like a mince around it that includes mushroom and a lot of other things, yeah. And then, there are different ways you can do the outer bread too, if you make it from scratch or wrap it in a pastry, whatever.
Yeah. The pastry, I think that would be really fun. I would love to do it sometime, or to just try it even, but I imagine it's one of those things, like you were saying, because it's an expensive cut of meat. Mm-hmm. I imagine it's one of those things that you kind of have to get it from a nice restaurant.
And I think that's perfectly fine. I mean, there are definitely some things where I'm looking through a magazine, I'm like, oh, that looks really good. I will never make that, but if I saw it on the menu, I would get it.
Right. It's like one of those, like, it's like they say that, like, to do proper ramen, it's like apparently a real chore. Yeah. Like there's tons of different steps to it. And, which I find kind of interesting, because ramen's so it feels very ubiquitous nowadays.
Industrialization makes all the difference.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It's really, like being able to do things in bulk, and make them work in bulk. It's, kind of a fascinating process. Like I'm fascinated by like the concept of modern food scientists, the people that are dealing with not just making a recipe, but also the logistics of distributing that across, a country or even the world. Like that's actually incredibly fascinating to me.
It's really cool. For a project a few years ago, I was reading a lot of books about the 1920s. And there's so much food technology that emerged in that period. I mean, it's like you see bird's eye vegetables at the grocery store. Mr. Birdseye came up with a freezing technique that would flash freeze the vegetables and then allow them to be distributed all over the country. And to me, I thought Birdseye was, it's just, a bird reference in relation to growing. No, it's actually a Mr. Birdseye.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it's the technological leaps, like, again, like we were talking about before, like things like refrigeration, like, can you imagine trying to, the concept would be there for somebody, if you were talking to somebody that was, 800 years ago, like they would understand the concept of keeping food cooler.
Yes.
Because they would have had root cellars. They, I don't know, at that point of time, people would have been bringing ice down from mountains to preserve
Absolutely.
food.
Well, yeah, I mean, Napoleon loved ice cream. I mean, you had things like that going on. So yeah, I mean, absolutely. They knew that kind of thing. And they knew that they could preserve ice in wood shavings, things like that.
And so like the concept is there, but like the actual thing of this is a 100% reliable, keep your food at the exact same temperature year round thing. Yeah. Like it's just the head would explode.
Well, yeah. And unfortunately, a lot of food would explode too. I mean, that was a big issue with wines through that period, was because most wines would not last more than a few months, because it would either turn to vinegar or it would literally explode. I
didn't realize that wine was something that had a short shelf life.
It did through that period, yeah. And you're looking at going into the 1700s. That's when individual glass bottles became more of a thing. Before then, it was, your casks and barrels, things like that. But yeah, wine was a very narrow window. It was literally like, you would be lucky if your September harvest lasted till Easter. That'd be like a very aged wine within standards. Yeah.
No, that's wild. Just like the, it's almost like disheartening, right? This idea that food, there was most of human history, the vast majority of human history, food just did not last.
No.
Like if you had something, you had to eat it or sell it to your neighbor,
or it'd make you sick or kill you.
Yeah. Yep. It's kind of crazy to think about as very pampered modern people.
Yeah, and you're looking at even a century ago, things like canned goods, ptomaine poisoning from canned goods was a terrible thing and killed a lot of people when they were trying to preserve food, and it turned to poison essentially.
Well, yeah, there was that. Was it The Terror? Is that the TV show I'm thinking of? My wife watched it, and she told me about it, but I didn't. It's about the Arctic explorers whose ships got locked in ice, and then it turned out that their canned food was all driving them insane or something like that.
Oh gosh. Well, there've been a lot of theories like that. There's something about there's a theory that the Salem witch trials, that the witches, it was something like the wheat harvest had turned and affected them, or things like that. So there are a lot of things like that people try and understand in hindsight.
Well, yeah, and there's theories now of, like that's what caused lots of mass hysterias in history. Wheat that has a weird, psychedelic germ in it.
Yeah.
Like little things like that it's kind of crazy to think that they really could have like literally steered history in some places. And the people living it had no idea because they were just eating their food,
Yeah. And going back to, talking about the army running on its stomach. I mean, that's when, the foods can definitely, if the food goes bad, if the well is bad, then, everyone's laid low and, can't even make it to a latrine.
It's such a crazy thought. Well, at the risk of talking about food even more, I like to end all of these conversations with a really simple question for each of my guests, and that's what's the last meal you ate that blew your mind?
Oh my goodness, that is a tough one. Gosh.
And I'll give it to you. I'll give it to you as what is the last thing in general. It could be a cheese if you'd like, or a baked good. Just the last thing that you ate that just boom.
Well, I've got to say I had a really good salad for lunch that had 2 different cheeses in it. It had Wisconsin goat Colby Jack, and then along with that was I think it was a Beemster Velasquez, and I'm probably saying that wrong. Pardon me, but it's a Gouda that is a very young Gouda that pretty much was almost like a caramel with taste. So I had both of those cut up with more of the Colby Jack than the Gouda, because otherwise the Gouda could really overwhelm a salad because it's such a sweet cheese. And it was really good. I had avocado and bacon on there, and I love these sweet kale salad mixes. And so as a really nice poppy seed dressing, and just that combo together was really good. And I have that for my lunch most days, and I really enjoy it. But I always try different cheeses in it.
Oh, that's great. That's a great way to try cheeses. We've discovered this place that's literally just down the hill from us. It's like a mile away. And it's a local farm that they've got a pretty extensive hydroponic setup, where they have a little kiosk out front, like a little enclosed booth where you can go and you can get salad like 3 days a week.
Oh, nice.
Freshly grown salads. And we do that occasionally. And honestly, I love a good fresh green salad with some grilled chicken breast or like some bacon bits or something on there. Oh man.
Good. Yeah.
I can eat that.
Salad is so good. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's weird because we get you get turned off from salads because you like those pre-prepared ones you get at the store, and you kind of well, this isn't actually very good. I'm going to drown it in ranch. But you can get a really good fresh salad with good ingredients and just a tiny bit of vinaigrette or something over it. Oh, and it's delicious.
Yeah, I was lucky this year. Phoenix area in Arizona has a very small growing season for non-native plants. Our winter is what is summer to most people. I mean, so I put in some romaine, a purple romaine, and then a classic green romaine. And I lived off that and supplemented that in my other salad mixes for about 2 months. And it was so good. And I could tell every bite that had it because it was so fresh and green and crisp.
Oh, yeah. No, that's fantastic. I love that. I did, for a while, I did a little tiny, one of those little personal hydroponics.
Oh, yeah.
And I did salad in it. And I ended up getting, because I would do it like a fancy lettuce in it. And I ended up getting very discouraged because I would get 2 good harvests and then it would go bitter.
Oh, yeah.
And I could never fix that. And I don't know why, apparently it's something you can fix, and it's a known problem with doing that at home. But I never had any success and I gave up. But man, those 2 harvests I got, it was always delicious. It was so good, clip it right here next to the sink, wash it off, make a salad, yummy.
It's a shame that it wouldn't last more than that. Oh man, how frustrating.
I know, it's always so frustrating. And of course, I live in Utah, which is not as hot as, Phoenix, but it's still a high desert. And so you can't grow lettuce outside here.
It does limit things a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. But, oh, well, it is fun when you can grow your own food. But Not required, thankfully, in the part of the world we live in.
It's just nice when you can, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. That was author Beth Cato. You can find links to Beth's social media down in the show notes. You can find me, as always, at brianmcclellan.com. Be sure to pre-order Beth's new novel, 1,000 Recipes for Revenge. Special thanks to James Sutter for music and Tom Bishop for production. If you'd like to support the podcast, head on over to patreon.com/pagebreak or buy my books in ebook, paperback, or audio. You can also get signed copies of my books direct from my website or swag from my Redbubble store. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a review. If you're listening to this via Patreon, please stick around for bonus chat during the epilogue. Special thanks to Elijah, Ivor Gullickson, James Clark, Jennifer Johnson, Jason Nall, Kyle Anderson, Sexton Hardcastle, Talon, Brian, Will Lebelski, Bradley Thornhill, and Roberto Fontana for their backing on Patreon.